Are we ready?
Well, hold
Can I
on.
take one drink?
Yes, we are recording. You want to make sure, just to make sure we're recording,
It says recording in the corner.
right?
I'm Lisa Schorfheide with Berkeley Environmental. I'm a Claims Services Director. And with me today is Jennifer Clanton, Director of Special Investigations Unit for WR Berkeley, and Timothy McGuire, Executive Vice President and Chief Claim Officer at Berkeley Environmental. Today we're going to be discussing fraud. Some of the topics we're going to cover are what is fraud, why it matters, and how technology is changing the face of fraud. So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into fraud?
I started off as an adjuster, mostly handling auto type claims. And, I happened to have that opportunity where there were some things happening within organized ring activity, specifically with staged accidents. Really, when they say organized, it's organized, and then you've got to try to figure it all out. And it's like putting a puzzle piece together. It was very, very involved operation, and I think out the gate for myself, it allowed me to learn a lot up front, and only made my journey even better as it's gone over the years.
Sounds like an exciting background.
Yes.
So Tim, tell us more about you and your background.
Sure. So I'm in my 33rd year of insurance experience. One of my first experiences here at Berkeley was a very large auto fire where several power units, or we call power units in the industry, trucks, essentially went up in flames at one of our insured facilities. And I wanted to reach out to NICB, and I learned that we weren't members of NICB, which is the National Insurance Crime Bureau. Basically, I made efforts to join that. Berkeley Environmental and Nautilus joined the NICB, and we presented an idea to come up with a fraud shared platform. And that's why Jennifer is with us now.
So Jennifer, maybe you can get us started and tell us, what is fraud?
Well, that is a great question, right? It's interesting because it's a word that when you ask people, they have different opinions of it, but the actual legal definition of it is actually when you are deceiving to obtain some type of gain. So most of the time it is monetary, but there are other types of reasons and motives for things that why people commit fraud. You've got different stages, different levels, got hard fraud, soft fraud, but it's the intent. That's the big piece behind it.
And Tim, why should customers care about fraud?
There's a couple of things at play. Fraud can be very pervasive. A lot of people might think that it doesn't impact them, but it really impacts all of us. Jen can probably come up with some of the industry numbers involving fraud and the financials as far as what it's estimated to be on an annual basis. But fraud impacts us all because essentially it's passed on to the consumer. It raises premiums, and essentially it breaks down the entire claim process if we're not having any type of focus on it. So it's important in the standpoint that it impacts the bottom line of the premiums of our customers. And also we want to demonstrate to our insureds that we're very aware of fraud and that we're taking measures to identify it and also to address it, to show that we're fighting the good fight and that we're not just basically paying these claims with a blind eye towards it, because again, it's a negative impact for the customer, for the reputation of the carrier. Essentially, we're just trying to draw awareness to it and also trying to address it through some overt actions that we're taking that myself and Jen will get into further.
I've heard both of you mention hard fraud, soft fraud. What is the difference between hard and soft fraud? And maybe give us an example of what falls in each bucket.
Yeah, so soft fraud is going to be what you see most common. So that is kind of faked, exaggerated injuries. Those are the ones where you'll start to see things that, are not as complex. They're not thinking some type of an organized way. A lot of times that tends to be more individual fraud. And sometimes people just think, oh, this isn't a big deal. I'm just going to go ahead and, they could lie about something that seems very simple and it really isn't. It becomes something much more and they don't even realize. So that's where the intent comes in. The hard fraud is what I was referencing with the organized activity. So the hard fraud is not as common as the soft would be. Now it can be, you can have it individual. It's just that they're usually where you find that pattern of repeat. And then you truly do have an organized ring where you've got multiple entities and people involved in it.
Could you just talk briefly about the scope of fraud that the industry states there is, and how much each dollar is spent paying fraudulent claims?
It's been interesting. So if anyone ever sees anything that comes out, especially any of the articles, whether it's at a state level or a federal level, they're referencing different types of fraud within the insurance world because of all the different types of lines of coverage that are written. But one of the big things that for so many years, the number was sticking at 80 billion. Okay, so for the last 2 decades, it really had been at that number. And the person the lead was taken by the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, working with some other companies to try to provide stats around the actual cost of fraud. And so now with the new number, which all of this had kind of started towards the end of 21, going into 22 for the numbers, and we're now at 308, I think, $0.6 billion now in overall insurance fraud costs. It rolls down in every way that you're not even seeing, whether, from a consumer concept, definitely from like a premium perspective, but also people don't even realize simple like cargo theft. That's a perfect example where it also rolls down because you've got things that are happening and that cost of that shipment then goes back to the company, and then the company has to try to figure it out as well, absorbing cost, and then it goes back out to the consumer and prices are going up. So it's not just a loan premium either. I think people for fraud awareness just need to be aware that it's a multitude of things and different ways that it affects. And I think the only way that we really can get one change is legislative changes, but also that awareness piece and making sure that we have different people, not just within the insurance industry, but outside of that also reporting and being aware as well. So the numbers right now kind of go over the years. I can tell you with just numbers in general, when you're looking specifically at the insurance company alone and how they're getting hit, it does go up and down according to how the economy is doing as well. Because like I said, a lot of this stuff is the motives are driving and that's when people are hurting. And when are they hurting? They're hurting when the economy has some concerns. So that's where we start to see ups and downs. And part of the SIU is, really tracking patterns and trends that we're seeing, not only in the line of coverage, but we're looking at regions. We're looking at everything to what it actually is. So are we seeing an increase in fire? So we would want to look at that. Are we seeing an increase or a decrease? Because that's the other thing. We also want to know, are we seeing changes that are showing positive? So we're seeing that it is slowing down, but then something else might increase. Data has become extremely important in what we are looking at now from the fraud perspective.
So Tim, you mentioned the NICB. Talk about that some more. What exactly is that and why are they important to be a part of?
Ever since I've been an examiner, the prior carriers that I was part of had a membership with the National Insurance Crime Bureau. And one of the important things about it is that they are a not-for-profit. They have very, very good relationships with local jurisdictions as far as attorney generals, various police agencies. They are also very involved in a partnership with ISO Claim Services, which of course is the data driver for many of the claims in the property and casualty industry. So working hand in hand with ISO, they're able to use analytics to see exactly where claims are going There's a lot of commonalities as far as providers, medical providers, attorneys, and they've been able to identify several fraud rings because of the relationship with ISO, and then also present this evidence to various agencies they have relationships with to go forward with a fraud criminal case. And there's also certain immunities that are granted to carriers working together with other carriers and sharing information, which you don't have if you're not a member. So those are some of the critical things that come to mind. But Jen is right in the front line with NICB, so I'm going to pass it off to her with some of the other things that she can share.
Yeah, so since like I said, I've been in SIU now, for the last over 20 years now. And luckily when I started, I did start in Florida, and I was able to really have, just to get a better understanding of how important NICB is, especially for SIUs to work with, was the fact that they had established task forces. And so, back then, it was building more on the medical task forces. The property ones had existed already. As we started to really have a better, ability to work with them on combating specifically, the medical fraud, which is definitely more complex and involved. But NICB overall for operations, it's not only just in the US, they do have a great foreign ops team that I've had great success working with them. A lot of help and assistance with recoveries, not only just in vehicles, but also heavy equipment. They've also helped us with any of the, and this is all in regards to the property side, but they've really assisted in helping too when we've got issues with vehicles. So a lot of for people to know, like VIN washing and all of the different scams that are going on with vehicle thefts. They do help and assist in that as well with VIN identification. But they're also an assistance for us acting as our liaison. So we want to make sure that on the civil side that we're handling things, according to good faith, and we're handling things according to how our processes are on the claims handling side. Involved in that as SIUs, we do want to make sure, since there are mandated states where we do need to report to the different departments of insurance, and our job is to get that information over. Well, if it is identified and it is something that the state is going to be looking and taking further based on whatever that state specific statutes are in regards to insurance fraud, then NICB kind of assists as that liaison in the middle when we're sending information back and forth. Because obviously from the state perspective, it is more on the criminal side of it, and then we're the civil side. So they act as that person or company in the middle to help us exchanging that information. The other thing is too, it's not always state level. So there are times where we do need to get other agencies involved that could potentially be on the federal side. And that's also pieces where NICB assists us. NICB also, from just government affairs perspective, they're always assisting and trying to help and get some of the legislative changes as well. So there's a lot of different parts to NICB. And I think from an insurance fraud perspective, them really having seen overall, because they're seeing all kinds of different things from an insurance fraud perspective. And so from a data perspective, they're giving that additional help to us, when there is something that could potentially be, a threat and hurting overall, cost. They also help us too. One other thing is in fraud tips as well. So they've got a consumer hotline, and that information as an NICB member comes to us if it is identified as our company. So that's another avenue that helps us as well, because they obviously have a very large platform. And so that consumer option for reporting assists us.
And Jen, maybe you can touch upon the membership of NICB as far as property and casualty carriers. It's pretty substantial domestically as far as how many carriers are part of that network.
Yeah, so when we are looking at overall numbers now to become an NICB member and actually be an NICB member so that our policyholders are aware of the benefits of that, because we've got additional companies. Now, not all companies are involved in it, but when you do get the amount of volume, up into working with Verisk and the ISO platform. I think they're up to like 93% of carriers, that have that platform to be able to utilize, and then with the NICB membership working in coordination with that. So the product of just ISO alone too for identification is so important, just as a claims tool. And then having that data come in to help, put it all together for us within the SIU. It gives us that heads up. I do want to provide a clarification too to policyholders as well. SIU's main perspective and job is to make sure that we are having meritorious claims identified. It is the fraudulent claims that we want to identify and make sure that we are addressing those issues as soon as it's identified. That really ultimately is the main goal. And so, from a percentage of fraud, you'll hear here and there, but I know when anything you've seen article wise, podcast wise, or anything that's being reported out, you'll always hear about 10% of claim volume does have a potential for some type of a fraud indicator on it. Now that number is going up. I'm hearing different numbers. It depends on kind of how they're doing the surveys and the statistics behind it and stuff. But I mean, I've heard numbers up to almost 18% in some lines of coverage. So it does depend on the line of coverage. It depends on the region. So there's a lot of different things that we're seeing. Like I said, in SIU, we're always looking at patterns and trends. So when you look at overall claim volume, 10% alone, just using that figure alone is very high. We want to make sure that we've got the utilization of other things that can help us. And one of those is that relationship with NICB.